Uh, Thank you very much. Allow me to talk about at least the 7 key figures in psychology of religion. Just 7. And although I will not give details, I want to talk a little about them. William James, who lived between 1842 to 1910. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who lived between 1770 to 1831, and Sigmund Freud, who lived between 1856 to 1939. Carl Jung, or Carl Jung, who lived between 1875 to 1961. Alfred Andra, 1870 to 1937. Gordon Allport, who lived between 1897 to 1967, and Erik Erikson. Let me say that some of the key figures in psychology of religion include the figures the fellows have just mentioned. We can also add James Fowler, the one who is famous for the 6 stages of faith. That was a great piece of work from James Fowler, and is quoted everywhere and seen as a very critical contributor in psychology of religion. So let me talk about William James first and say just a few words, because we cannot exhaust even discussing one of them. It may take days just for one of them. So let me just give summaries and say that William James was an American philosopher, historian, and psychologist, largely referred to as the father of American psychology. And he is famous for helping to found psychology as a formal discipline, for establishing the school of functionalism in psychology, and for greatly advancing the movement of pragmatism in philosophy. Additionally, William James was the first educator to offer a psychology course in the United States. Now, just a little about his broad work. The man has done a lot. We can't come here and tell you we are saying too much. We can't. We can only summarize and give you some materials to follow it up. So this is an American man, and he affects every one of us who is interested in psychology of religion. First, you see him as a psychologist who affects every form of psychology he is counted. That's why he's so great, because he affects every type of psychology. But our bias is in psychology of religion. The bit he worked on psychology of religion, it is the area we want to focus on. So in his works, he strongly posited the view that individual religious experiences, rather than the precepts of organized religions, are the pillars of the world's religious life. Hence, when you look at Africa's chaotic new religious movements, NRMs, each exists or draws its religious orientations from the individual's leader's charisma, rather than the universalizing faith of the global church. So what he was trying to say in his book or in his works on individual religious experiences is to say that organized religions are actually the pillars. The real pillars are organized religions. So one's religious life is determined by what he calls the pillars in the name of organized religions. I should call it conventional religions. Hence, when you look at Africa's chaotic new religious movements, you cannot say that we have future in them. The future is in organized religions or conventional religions because they have doctrines very clear, they have laws and bylaws, they have organized systems of bishops, archbishops, and all that. But these are the ones that change every day. You are not sure, they are too erratic. It cannot form one's religious life. It cannot inform the global worldview of religion in the way it should be. And William James demonstrated this in his discussions of conversion, repentance, mysticism, and saintliness, and his observations on actual personal religious experiences. He is famous for his James Lange theory. He came up with James Lange, James, and then Lange, Lange, James Lange theory, which proposes that emotions occur as a mental reaction to the physiological conditions that result from a stimulus. Different physiological reactions are responsible for different kinds of emotions, according to him. And in his 1890 publications, Principles of Psychology, William James presented a bold proposal where he argued that emotions are the sensation of bodily changes, or as he put it, the bodily changes follow directly the perception of the exciting fact, and that our feeling of the same changes as they occur is the actual emotion. And he goes on in his treatise, the three constituents of the self, the three constituents of the self. He says they are physical objects and cultural artifacts. That is material self. Number two, human beings. That is the social self. And number three, mental processes and content. That is spiritual self. And he went on to draw the various components of the empirical self into three subcategories: the material self, and the social self, and the spiritual self. So all that. So you can see this is a huge contributor in psychology of religion. Now, in summary, we could not leave this great man. In summary, William James wrote 5 characteristics of the streaming way that conscious thinking occurs. Namely, 1, consciousness is personal and is changing. Consciousness is personal and is changing. Number 2, consciousness has a fringe and focus. Number 3, consciousness includes the apprehension of relationship. Number 4, consciousness is selective. Number 5, consciousness deals with inner states and external realities. Now, to me, the major contribution for William James in psychology of religion is ability to see that there must be consistency in religion. There must be reliability in religion. There must be something organized, something conventional, so that you don't have erratic practices informing our religious worldview. Because we are put in danger in Africa, where we have so many mushrooming new religious movements whose leadership is chaotic, is the big man syndrome again. You don't question them. They are dictators, to use a very rough or tough word. and you don't know where they're taking you. They can take you to a very ambiguous places because they are everything. But when there is the conventionality, you find this is a different worldview altogether. Now, let's look at the second man. We hope this will be few ones now. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who lived between 1770 to 1831. Of course, most people will say this is a philosopher, not a psychologist of religion. But with all these guys who are writing and writing and publishing, they were able to move across the disciplines. So you find them in religion, theology, psychology. You find them in history. You not evade these guys because they did huge contribution. Unlike us who don't want to work hard, of course, we claim to be specializing in certain areas, but we are actually not specializing in anything. We are just reading what they are doing and not even contributing. That is a danger zone for Africa in particular. Hegel is one of the most important figures in German idealism and one of the founding figures of modern Western philosophy. He defines religion as that which involves knowledge of the truth in the form of representation and viewed God as the fullest reality achieved through the self-determination of everything that is capable of any kind or degree of self-determination. In his view, thus, God emerges out of beings of limited reality, including ourselves, which he felt is a common occurrence to all religions. He appears to have used Christianity to draw conclusion for all religions, something that could mark his main weakness, because he was talking about religion in general, but he was using Christianity for his sampling in his data. Hegel also contributed about the unity of religion, which he felt conceives truth. In his argument that both religion and state are embodiments of truth, Hegel establishes an identity between religion and state at the metaphysical level. And we all know what is metaphysics or metaphysical. It is what you can't touch, like belief, faith, those are metaphysical things. So he establishes an identity between religion and state at the metaphysical level, in terms of thinking, believing, all that. Depending on our diverse schools of thought, this can be seen from diverse perspectives. For can religion be misused by the state, as there has been witnessed in African history, for example, or generally in history? There is time even Adolf Hitler had misused the religious sector in Germany by making them think he's a messiah of sorts to Germany's nationality and the general welfare of Germany. It wasn't. What about the quest for Boko Haram, for an Islamic state in Nigeria? Did Hegel err? Did he make a mistake? Did he err when he drew his examples from Christian religion and assumed that all religions are the same? That is another one we need to do as a critique, but still underline his strong points. For Hegel, the state is the final projection of the absolute. State ni serikali. I mean the government is the final projection of the absolute, and it embodies its own unique ethical life. The state is unique and supreme to the individuals within it. The state is the unification of the human beings. For him, the state is a divine idea as it exists on earth. Maybe he was reading Romans 13 and pushing it to the extreme to show even a dictatorial government is chosen by God. So the state is divine idea. It's an ideal thing for God. Such contributions can be seen as extreme if we consider some dictatorial systems, as in the case of Mussolini's Italy of 1930s and 40s, Hitler's Germany of 1930s and 1940s, Idi Amin's Uganda of 1970s and 80s, and Emperor Jean Bidel Bokassa's Central African Republic in 1970s and 80s, and even Sani Abacha's Nigeria of 1990s. all those makes us fear his position. Hegel's contribution finds strength in the fact that it is perhaps the most fully developed philosophical theory of history that attempts to discover meaning or direction in his history. Friedrich Hegel, regards history as an intelligible process moving towards a specific condition, that is, the realization of human freedom. He nevertheless did not come out strongly as a psychologist of religion. As a philosopher of religion, he scores more points anyway. Otherwise, this is a man who tried many areas of academia. He remains a great man. To move to the third person, to avoid wasting more time, Sigmund Freud, born 1856 to 1939, is remembered for portraying religion as a corrective neurosis of humankind, and argued that religious beliefs give expression to wishful thinking, to wishful fulfilling illusions, serving the immature emotional needs of the child living on within the adult. Sigmund Freud considered God as a fantasy and or make-believe, or things you are made to believe but they are not there, based on the infantile need for a dominant father figure. So he could see childishness in the belief in God, with religion as a necessity in the development of early civilization to help restrain our violent impulses that can now be discarded in favor of science and reason. Despite being referred to as psychologist of religion, Sigmund Freud did not show up at any given temple hour every Saturday or church during a Sunday service. He never wrapped himself in a prayer show and reading from the Torah as was expected of a Jewish child like him. To the end of his life, he maintained his distance or his stance as an uncompromising atheist, the stance he is best known for down to the 21st century. We know him as an atheist, non-believer in God. Now, in an autobiographical study, originally published in 1925, Sigmund Freud recounts that his parents were Jews and have remained a Jew myself. That's what he says. Familiarity with the Bible stories from an age even before he ran to read had an enduring effect on the direction of his interest. In 1873, Sigmund Freud, upon attending the University at Vienna, he first encountered anti-Semitism, who display hostility against Jews. They are called anti-Semitism. Those fellows who were opposed to the Jewish people, even to the present moment, there is anti-Semitism. And he says, I quote him, "I found that I was expecting to feel myself inferior and Aryan because I was a Jew." Okay, end of quote. So, before his wedding, I will go on. Before his wedding, Freud desired to convert to Protestantism to avoid a Jewish ceremony, but was ultimately persuaded not to do so. Well, he was a Protestant in a sense, but he was not, but again, an atheist. I don't know how it went, but the writings display a lot of protesting personality in Sigmund Freud. Another critical moment is seen in Freud's prefatory note to the Hebrew translation of Totem and Taboo in 1930. Here, Sigmund Freud describes himself as an author who is ignorant of the language of Holy Writ, who is completely estranged from the religion of his fathers, as well as from every other religion, but who remains in his essential nature a Jew and who has no desire to alter that nature. Nevertheless, Sigmund Freud saw the origin of religion as one which emanates from nostalgia for the pre-Oedipal infant sense of unity with its mother. Another controversial bit. Hence, religion flows from childhood and or babyhood, helpless times. That's where religion flows from. Helpless times, which in my view is a dangerous position to take. For Freud, although religion is still rooted in infantile helplessness, it derives to some extent from the earliest stage of postnatal development. In his argument against God's existence, Freud or Sigmund Freud points to the problem of suffering, and he develops the psychological argument that the whole concept is nothing but a projection of a childish wish for parental protection from the vicissitudes and sufferings of human existence. That is Freud and his dismissal of religion. On the whole, Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies referring to the science of the causes and effects of diseases, seen as originating from conflicts in the psyche, though dialogue between patient and psychoanalyst, and the distinctive theory of mind and human agency derived from it. He is the founder of psychoanalysis, a theory of how the mind works and a method of helping people in mental distress. To this end, he stressed on the importance of the unconscious mind. His primary assumption is that the unconscious mind governs behavior to a greater degree than people suspect. Indeed, the goal of psychoanalysis is to make the unconscious conscious. That means his somewhat controversial ideas remain relevant right into the 21st century. Now, looking at the fourth character, Carl Jung, who lived between 1875 to 1961, a student of Sigmund Freud. Carl Jung, others pronounce him as Carl Jung, others Carl Jung. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. His works has been influential in the fields of psychiatry, anthropology, archaeology, literature, philosophy, psychology, and religious studies. Now, from there you can see how these pioneer scholars or scholars of note find themselves in playing around multidisciplinary games. He is a psychologist, a psychiatrist, anthropologist, archaeologist, yes, a literature man or scholar, philosopher, psychologist, again, religious studies. You can even say he's a theologian. So you find these guys making very strong theological positions, particularly when Carl Jung is disagreeing with his teacher, who was an atheist, and Carl Jung was a believer, was a theist. You find a theologian in this gentleman. So you can see how, as we go up, we become philosophers, philosophizing across the multidisciplinary context, because it can't be. You can't achieve from one disciplinary perspective. You need to do dialogue with other disciplines at those higher levels. So when the International Psychoanalytical Association was formed in 1910, Carl Jung became the president at the request of his former teacher, his former professor, Sigmund Freud. Conversely, in 1912, while on a lecture tour of America, Carl Jung publicly criticized Sigmund Freud's theory of Oedipus complex. Of course, you remember Oedipus complex is a theory of psychosexual stages of development, which remains controversial area. Some of us disagree with it. Personally, I do disagree with it in a big way. Oedipus complex. And his emphasis on infantile sexuality. Even that other one is also controversial. The following year, that is 1913, this led to an irrevocable split between Carl Jung and his teacher, Sigmund Freud. And Jung went on to develop his own version of psychoanalytic theory. So they parted ways, academically speaking. Of course, Sigmund Freud had thought he is going to get this guy to be part of his, a promoter of his school of thought. But he was surprised. He was trying to nurture this man, but the man found he had a different way of looking at it. So religion divided them. Now, you can try to look at the differences between Jung and Freud. And I posted a diagram on your screen which has the assumption Jung and Freud. So assumption is nature and purpose of the libido. For Jung it is a generalized source of psychic energy motivating a range of behaviors. For Sigmund Freud, it is a source of psychic energy specific to sexual gratification. You can see they are different. The one sees it is too general, the one of nature and purpose of the libido. The one Jung sees it as general source. And that other one talks of specific to sexual gratification. And so you can see how they're different. The other one is to do with the nature of the unconscious. Jung saw it as a storehouse of repressed memories specific to the individual and our ancestral past. And Freud saw it as a storehouse for unacceptable repressed desires specific to the individual. You can see how each saw it differently. Yeah. One saw it as unacceptable repressed desires specific to the individual. That is Freud. Or the other one saw it as repressed memories specific to the individual and to our ancestral past. So we remember the unconscious because we also remember the ancestors, our own past for Carl Jung. But the other fellow is just you yourself. He has nothing communalistic. Freud was too individualistic on the nature of the unconscious. Or his student, Jung, so even the community is also part of it. And of course, one was too religious, the other one wasn't. The last one, cause of behavior. How did they view cause of behavior? Why do we behave the way we behave? For Carl Jung, past experiences is a cause of behavior in addition to our own future ambitions. But you look at Carl Jung, for him, the cause of behavior that we do, yes, he agrees it's his past experiences, but then he draws on childhood. He says, particularly in childhood, it's so specific on childhood determines the cause of the behavior we do. But Carl Jung is more realistic. He says, no, look at it here, my teacher. It is the environment that makes you who you are. What I'm doing today is the experience that I got in my environment. If I write a lot, it's an environment I found it and people who valued what I'm doing. So I thought it's a good thing to do. Environment has a place, and also my future aspiration to make my own contribution is also a factor. Now, let me say, as I conclude on this, I say that besides the above, the two Carl Jung and his teacher or professor, they differed on matters to do with not just overconscious versus unconscious, conscious versus unconscious, but also over believer versus unbeliever in religion. Carl Jung believed that religion was a natural expression of the corrective unconscious, whilst Freud believed it was a corrective neurosis. And do you know what neurosis means? It means a mental condition that is not caused by organic disease. It involves symptoms of stress, such as depression, anxiety, obsessive behavior, hypochondria, but not a radical loss of touch with reality. So you could see how dismissive Freud was. It is just corrective organic disease, religion now. It involves symptoms of stress. That's how Sigmund Freud saw religion. And you look at Jung, then we continue with Jung because we are looking at Carl Jung. Carl Jung thought that religiousness was a way of aiding the process of individuation, the exploration of ourselves, and the final acceptance of who we are. Now, when Carl Jung talks about God, he's really talking about the God within, and that is the self. He was once asked if he believed in God. He answered, I don't believe, I know God. I don't believe, but I know God. God in me. Thus, Carl Jung made an act of faith in the existence of the corrective unconscious and archetypes as he interpreted Christianity in the light of his beliefs. Okay? In his autobiography entitled Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that is the memos he wrote to us to make us understand him. Of course, every great person has to write a memo about himself. Otherwise, how can we know you? Yes. So he wrote the book in 1961. And remember, this is a man. Let's go back and look at this man. When did he live? How many years did he live? The year he died, that's the time he released his memos. Was he thinking that he'll die? God has a way of making us remember or do things at the right way at the right time. Whatever we do, God has a way. Okay, well, not everything, some things are ours, but generally we say God has a way. It could be our own making. Now, in this book, Memories, Dreams, Reflection, he described his life as a story of self-realization of the unconscious. So he kept trying to understand what was hidden to him. Jung believed that our personality begins with a corrective unconscious developed within our species throughout time, and that we have only limited ability to control the psychic process. That is our own personality. Thus, our true personality arises from within as our corrective unconscious comes forth into our personal unconscious and then our consciousness. It's like Mahatma Gandhi said, true leadership is when you lose yourself in the service of others and you then discover yourself in the service of others. So in our unconsciousness, according to Carl Jung, you discover your own consciousness. That's how he did for himself. So that is the game he played around. Looking at the fifth one, we see that there are quite a number. There are 7. The fifth one now. Alfred Andra, 1870 to 1937. Alfred Andra was an Austrian medical doctor, psychotherapist, and the founder of the School of Individual Psychology. His emphasis on the importance of feelings of belonging, family constellation, and birth order set him apart from Freud and other members of the Vienna Circle. He was the founder of Adlerian psychology, sometimes called individual psychology. He is considered the first community psychologist because his work pioneered attention to community life, prevention, and population health. Adlerian theory purports that Humans are social beings, and therefore all behavior is socially embedded and has social meaning. Ondra emphasized the importance of relationship and being connected to others, including the larger community in which people are reside. Critically important is the fact that Ondrian position and Rarian position, rather, toward religion is largely positive. Andra viewed God as the concept of complete perfection and not as an internalized parental image. He defined God as the human understanding of greatness, wow, and complete perfection. Now, our friend Andra's weakness is seen here when he pushes the perfection idea of God to an extent of killing anthropomorphic understanding of God. I mean anthropomorphic language, where you say God as a father, God as a mother, God as, using human names to understand God. Yes, God as a friend. A phenomenon where we compare God as father, brother, mother, and so on. Now, by rejecting parental images of God, our friend Andra limited our easy understanding of God. Or did he philosophize God too much? That is another area we need to ask ourselves. Because if we don't use, particularly in Africa, if we don't use African way of looking at God, if we don't use those African jargons or using anthropomorphic ones, we will have issues. We will not really be able to understand God for some. He will look isolated God. Yes, in Africa, we find it easy to make reference to God by using human terms, such as God as our great or proto-ancestor, the ideal ancestor. When we think of the role of ancestors, those who went before us, those who are great people, they had a, on what we. So God is greater than our grandparents, who are so Goliaths, who are Goliaths. If we fail to do that, we don't understand God, because we are used to seeing those ancestors as the people who have made us reach where we are. And even if you look at Isaac Newton, when he was flattened for coming up with the gravitational laws, he refused to be flattened, and he said, if I can see this far, I must have stood on the shoulders of other giants. So don't flatter me, the ancestors before me. Although he talked about Galilei, who was more of his contemporary, whom he sat on their shoulders to make scientific breakthroughs. So in Africa, looking at those who are before us and not assuming that we have trodden on an area nobody has done it is the way to go, or the way it is done. And that's the way people can understand God. Every group of people have their contextual way of understanding God. Sometimes Jesus is referred to as an elder. Sometimes because of the importance of an elder in African society. Yes, in Swahili is mzee wa kijiji. He talks with reason. He doesn't mislead us. He doesn't confuse us. Mzee wa kijiji is not a corrupt person. He's not a cunning person. And that's how they want to see Jesus, as that mzee, that elder, or even a chief, where a good chief will not mess with corruption and harassing the same people. He does it ontologically, his ontological significance is seen in the way he does everything for God. You don't work for anybody but for God. Whatever you do, you are doing for God. So there's a time Jesus is called a chief. There's a time Jesus is called a king. There's time when Jesus is called, in African functionality Christology, a supportive elder brother or a good neighbor who answers you at a point of distress. When you shout your house is on fire, you find that very good neighbor coming to stand with you. There are times when Jesus is called a medicine man. In Swahili language is called is a good Swahili one that is escaping my mind. Maybe I'm tired now, and so on. So these are anthropomorphic ones to describe God and Christ, and it appears that Andra didn't support this. Without such anthropomorphic terms that Andra feels are not in tandem with God's perfection, we may not easily understand God in Africa. God may remain a philosophical concept in Andra's understanding when you now take it to Africa. African conception of God from African indigenous ways. Because Africans are just Africans, and Europeans are just Europeans, converted Europeans to this or that religion, but they are Europeans. And so there are certain contextual needs that cannot be downplayed or ignored or bypassed. So God may appear remote, God may appear transcendental and separated from the African peoples if we look at it from Andra's position. But everyone, every believer is happy. Every psychologist of religion is happy to hear him, our friend Andra, talking of God as a perfect one who needs nothing. In a sense, there's truth in that. God is perfect because we are imperfect. That's why we are mortal beings, and God is immortal, the one who will be there across the generation, across the centuries. Yes. The sixth character, Gordon Allport, who lived between 1897 to 1967. Let me comment about this gentleman. Gordon Willard Allport was an American psychologist. Allport was one of the first psychologists to focus on the study of the personality, and is often referred to as one of the founding figures of personality psychology. He believed that personality is shaped by a person's childhood experiences, current environment, and the interaction between those two concepts. Obviously, there is a lot of truth. Environment shapes us anyway, logically speaking. So you agree with Gordon Allport at that stage. Yes. It's also shaped, personality is also shaped by childhood experiences. Yes, the people you encounter. If they are schooling, you want to school like them. If they are taking liquor, destructive narcotics, you want to do as they are doing. And the interaction between those two concepts, the way they interact, there's an interplay between the two. Allport believed that a useful theory of personality rests on the assumption that people not only react to their environment, but also shape their environment and cause it to react to them. Personality is a growing system, allowing new elements to constantly enter into and change the person. Allport is best known for the concept that although adult motives develop from infantile drives, they become independent of them. Allport called this concept functional autonomy. His approach favored emphasis on the problems of the adult personality rather than on those of infantile emotions and experiences. The five broad personality traits described by the theory are extraversion, also called spelled extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Neuroticism. Something else. Something else. Something else is that Allport suggested that conduct traits are rare and dominating, usually developing later in life. They tend to define a person to such an extent that their names become synonymous with their personalities. Examples of this include the following descriptive terms. Take, for example, Machiavellian, narcissistic, Don Juan, Christ-like. So what he was saying is, cardinal traits are rare and dominating, usually developing later in life. Cardinal traits. Cardinal meaning something, more conk. So those traits, those conk traits, they tend to define a person to such an extent that their names become synonymous with their personality. That's why you have Christ-like personality. So Allport is the one who deals with the personality, and he does it very well. Now, you can see if you have developed a very strong personality, many people may want to imitate it or to go by it because of its power. So Allport's religious orientations are normatively portrayed as being independent dimensions of religion as means that is extrinsic and ends intrinsic. So opposite religious orientations show religion as a means and also as the ends. So religion to him is something that is within and without. Gordon Allport made neither assumptions nor denials regarding the claims of revealed religion, and he felt that as a scientist he had no right to do so. He couldn't talk about revealed religion or what we may call the debate of natural revelation and special revelation. He avoided it. Still, Gordon Allport believed that psychology must examine subjective religion in the structure of personality whenever and wherever religion is involved. Now, more than any other personality theorist, he was that more than other personality theories. That is Gordon Allport. Besides personality theory, Allport recognized the importance of conscious motivation. His emphasis on conscious motivation probably began with his short-lived discussion with Sigmund Freud, when Allport had not yet selected a career in psychology. He had not taken his area of specialty when he met Sigmund Freud. And after they had a discussion, however short it is, he got his own inspiration and went his way, and dealt on personalities. How do we develop personality? How do we break them? Now, the main flaw of Allport's trait theory of personality is that it is not directly based on empirical research. That is the main flaw. He published very little evidence to support his theory. That is actually, to me, his weakness. In his first publication, he collaborated with his brother, Freud Allport, to study the central characteristics of 55 male college students. So he collaborated with his brother, and nothing much is known of going to correct the data in the field. That is what you call original research. And but he is not a fellow you can dismiss, because he talks about personality in a manner that is very convincing. Maybe his research was mainly experiential, which is also part of research. Participant observer, looking at what people are doing and being able to draw an informed intellectual conclusion. So let us summarize on Gordon Allport, the man who lived between 1897 to 1967. Now, he traced how religion develops from childhood into adolescence and through into maturity. He emphasized how believing in God functions differently for different people at different times in their lives. Yes, he went on and attempted to substantiate his claims from his empirical studies of religious belief and behavior. So that is the end of Gordon Allport. Now, the last one for this long lecture, so that we invite discussion, is Erik Erikson. Now, we are not talking about Erik Erikson and the years he lived and that kind of thing, but we want to look at generally his thoughts, time factor. We'll get you back to the years he lived and other details. But for now, we'll look at the 8 stages of human emotional and psychological development that he describes. He's famous for the 8 stages of psychological development, human, emotional, those 8 stages, and we beg to mention them. But let me first of all introduce him a little and say that according to Erik Erikson, I know we mentioned him earlier, the socialization process consists of 8 phases. The 8 stages of man or humanity. His 8 stages were formulated not through experimental work, but through what we'd call wide-ranging experience in psychotherapy. psychotherapy, including extensive experience with children and adolescents from low as well as upper and middle social class. Each stage is regarded as by Erickson as psychosocial crisis. So in every stage we move, it's a social cycle. It's a psychosocial crisis, which arises and demands resolution before the next stage can be satisfactorily negotiated. Now, these stages are conceived in an almost architectural sense. Satisfactory learning and resolution of each crisis is necessary if the child is to manage the next and subsequent ones satisfactorily. Just as the foundation of a house is essential to the first floor, which in turn must be structurally sound to support and the second story, and so on and so forth. So going now direct to the 8 stages, we can just mention what it's all about. Otherwise, you can't get the in-depth of it. It's not possible. Number 1 is learning basic trust versus basic mistrust. Okay, basic mistrust is hope. Chronologically, this is a period of infancy. Through the first 1 or 2 years of life, the child, well handled, nurtured, and loved, develops trust and security and a basic optimism. Badly handled, he becomes insecure and mistrustful. So if you mishandle a child according to this first 8 stage of development, the person remains mistrustful. He doesn't trust anyone. So some of the behaviors we espouse are not from us. They are taken from the first 1 or 2 years of our lives. How we are mishandled and handled. Yeah, we may not trust all. Number 2, learning autonomy versus shame, what he calls will. The second psychosocial crisis, Erickson believes, occurs during early childhood, probably between 18 to 2 years and 3.5 to 4 years of age. The well-parented child emerges from this stage sure of himself, elated with his newfound control and proud rather than ashamed. Autonomy is not, however, entirely synonymous with assured self-possession, initiative, and independence, but at least for children in the early part of this psychosocial crisis includes stormy self-will, tantrums, stubbornness, and negativism. For example, one may see 2-year-olds resolutely folding their arms to prevent their mothers from holding their hands as they cross the street. Also, the sound of "no" rings through the house or the grocery store. Yes, that's how he views it. Okay, let's go to the third one. There are 8 stages. The third one is learning initiative versus guilt, what he now calls purpose. Erik Erikson believes that this third psychosocial crisis occurs during what he calls the pre-age or the later preschool years from 3.5 to entry into formal school. During it, the healthy developing child learns to imagine, to broaden his skills through active play of all sorts, including fantasy. Number 2, to cooperate with others. He also learns to lead as well as to follow, to be led and then to follow others. Now, something else. Immobilized by guilt, he is number 1, fearful. Number 2, hangs on the fringes of groups. Number 3, continues to depend on adults. And number 4, the last one, the person is restricted both in the development of play skills, and in imagination. Concerning industry, the fourth one, industry versus inferiority, what he calls competence. Erik Erikson believes that the fourth psychosocial crisis is handled, for better or worse, during what he calls the school age, presumably up to and possibly including some of junior high school. Here, the child learns to master the more formal skills of life. That is number one. These formal skills of life include number one, relating with peers according to rules. Number two, progressing from free play to play that may elaborately remain structured by rules and may demand formal teamwork, such as baseball, basketball, football, and all that. And number three, the last one, mastering social studies, reading, arithmetic, and so on. Now, the danger with this Erikson view is he is assuming every child in some part of tropical Africa are not going to school. So when you say arithmetic and giving the impression we are all in America or somewhere, I think that's another weak side of it all. Homework is a necessity, and the need for self-discipline increases yearly. The child who, because of his successive and successful resolutions of earlier psychosocial crises, is trusting now, is now autonomous, and now full of initiative, will learn easily enough to be industrious. Now, going now to the fifth point, we must conclude the fourth point by saying that, however, the mistrusting child will doubt the future. The shame and guilt-filled child will experience defeat and inferiority. The fifth point, learning identity versus identity diffusion. That is what he calls, Erikson calls, fidelity. Now, during the fifth psychosocial crisis, that is adolescence, from about 13 to 14 to about 20, the child, now an adolescent, learns how to answer satisfactorily and happily the question of who am I? Who are you? But even the best and just end of adolescence experiences some role identity diffusion. There is most boys and probably most girls experiment with minor delinquency. Rebellion flourishes, self-doubts front the youngster, and so on and so forth. There is something rebellion at that adolescent age. So Erikson believes that during successful early adolescence, mature time perspective is developed. The young person acquires self-certainty as opposed to self-consciousness and self-doubt. He comes to experiment with different, usually constructive, roles rather than adopting a negative identity, such as delinquency. He actually anticipates achievement and achieves rather than being paralyzed by feelings of inferiority or by inadequate time perspective. In later adolescence, clear sexual identity, manhood or womanhood, is established. Okay? During that time, Erikson calls the fifth stage, also called fidelity. The adolescent seeks leadership, okay, because he's inspired by somebody or someone somewhere, and gradually develops a set of ideals, socially congruent and desirable in the case of successful adolescent. Yeah. Erikson believes that in our culture, adolescence affords a psychosocial moratorium, particularly for middle and upper class children. They do not yet have to pray for keeps, but can experiment, trying various roles, and thus hopefully find the one most suitable for them. Quickly, the sixth stage, which he calls love, or he calls it learning intimacy versus isolation, into bracket love. Now, the successful young adult, for the first time, can experience true intimacy, the sort of intimacy that makes possible good marriage or genuine and enduring friendship. That is the stage of love. Love. Number 7, learning generativity versus self-absorption. He calls it care, the stage of care. In adulthood, the psychosocial crisis demands generativity, both in the sense of marriage and parenthood, and in the sense of working productively and creatively. The last one, the 8th stage, integrity versus despair. That is what Erik Erikson calls wisdom. If the other 7 psychosocial crises have been successfully resolved, if they were successfully resolved, then according to Erikson, the mature adult develops the peak of adjustment. He develops integrity. Integrity is like incorruptibility, a person who cannot be corrupted, a person who is genuinely believable and trustworthy and all that. If those crises, the psychosocial crises we have noted, the 7 of them, if they were handled well, good things may happen, according to Erik Erikson. Now, this person now trusts. She is independent and dares the new. He's now able to experiment new ideas with confidence because he knows things work. If they all fail, there can be tendency to lose hope and think that things can't work. But on the other hand, we have seen cases where people from very well endowed families being supplied with everything they want, but failing to make it in life because they lack self-confidence. They rely on the big men. The big man syndrome comes in their mind, and they look at those big people, big parents, important, great parents, as the people who run even their own families. That is where they lose wisdom, that integrity versus despair that Erik Erikson talks about in stage 8 is all about. That's where it contrasts it. So if a person is motivated by the success of the other crises that she has handled, that person may work very hard because he has found a well-defined role in life and finds a well-defined role in life because he has been successful and has developed a self-concept with which he is happy or she is happy. He can be intimate without strain, guilt, regret, or lack of realism, and he is proud of what he creates, his children, his work, or his hobbies. So you love what you do because after all, you have been able to maneuver through the crisis and made it. Now, if one or more of the earlier psychosocial crises have not been resolved, he may view himself and his life with disgust and despair. So if you don't get it right in all those stages, 8 stages, you may find yourself in a hot soup and you may find yourself in a crisis of survival. Now, as we move on as a conclusion, now these 8 stages of humanity as seen by Erik Erikson or the psychosocial crisis are plausible and insightful descriptions of how personality develops, but at present they are descriptions only. We possess at best rudimentary and tentative knowledge of just what sort of environment will result, for example, in traits of trust versus distrust, or clear personal identity versus diffusion. Helping the child through the various stages and the positive learning that should accompany them is a complex and difficult task, as any worried parent or teacher knows. Search for the best ways of accomplishing this task accounts for much of the research in the field of child development. Now, socialization then is learning, and learning is teaching process that, when successful, results in the human organisms moving from its infant state of helpless but total egocentricity to its ideal adult state of sensible conformity coupled with independent creativity. That is what happens, as we have noted, when we go through those 8 stages of Erikson and we are able to maneuver it properly. And now that comes out very well. So we have looked at the 7 key figures in psychology of religion, though we could have ended James Forrest and his 8 stages of human development, which were considered much earlier. And there are, of course, others, the modern ones. These are some of the old ones. There are some others, besides William James, George Hegel, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Ondra, Gordon Allport, Eric Erickson, James Ford. There are quite a number, and there are also others. So now, time for comments. Thank you very much.